Well, hello, folks. I'm L.A. Little, and this is your daily TA Wrap, where we take a look at these markets and we do it from a neoclassical perspective each time, asking ourselves what happened today. What does it tell us about the coming days? I do this show 4 times a week, Monday through Thursday, live at 9 o'clock Eastern Time here from the base of the Rocky Mountains. Folks, glad you could join me. We had a nice big push up today. If you're just looking at the surface, it looks pretty good. But underneath the surface, I'm not so sure. You got to put those rally caps back in the closet, I think, and consider that there's probably some more work to do. I wrote a piece. Let me find it here, back here. Where is it? I can't find it now, but it was about shaking the trees, and there was one here, but there was one over on the trading articles as well. But the ideal is that a lot of times they shake the trees, they take the weaker holders, and they shake them out of their positions. And I think that this is options expiration. We got the Federal Reserve. We had the sell down last week as a result of some of the fear trade going into the Russian situation, the exogenous event with Ukraine. This morning, is a slap on the wrist is all they did in terms of sanctions. Really nothing. I mean, they sanctioned like 8 or 10 people that really were basically low-level people. So the market got a nice little rally off of that. We got some industrial production numbers look pretty good, and it was upward and onward, right? S&Ps gained 17 and 3/4, 1858 over that 1850 area again. Dow Jones picked up 181, 16,247. The composite, it wasn't up as much as the Dow or the S&P, a little bit weaker. 4279, 4280 was the close, 3455 higher. IndX 3662 and a half, up 34 and a half, and the Russell only up a little over 0.5%, 1188 and a quarter. So, and gold sold off again after hours. It was down about 6 today. It's down about 8.5 right now as it's changing price here. Oil was down today as well, down a little bit more after hours. I need to change these contracts. It's actually down more than that, I believe, after hours. But dollar was pretty much flat. Bonds were actually sold off today. They're up a little bit after hours. So what's going on? Are we just going to put risk back on? It kind of feels like what's going on. If you look at the S&P chart, it also looked like what's going on. And the key things here, if you're looking at just the S&P itself, you came down to test what was a support zone. Right, this area here, it was a support zone. You came down to test it. You tested into it now twice. You tested once here, and now you're testing the second time. The problem will be is if you test it the third time, because your probabilities go way down if that's the case. If you look at it from a different perspective, you had a big thrust down here on Thursday. Volume expands. Friday, you cut underneath it. And I believe we closed back over, if I remember right. No, actually we closed under it on the S&P. 1841 of 13. Yeah, closed just underneath it. So a little less volume, you close underneath it. Today what do? You spike up the other way with absolutely no volume. Okay, so we've seen plenty of these spikes up with no volume that just keep going, right? And that could be the case here, but that's why we don't look at just the S&P. We look around and see what else is going on. So let's look at some of the others. Let's start with the Russell. So what does the Russell do? Russell comes down, test into this area, right? Support was down here, test into it. Russell does not get underneath, stays inside on the next day. That was Friday. Inside bar, a little less volume. That's good. And now you pop up, but what do? You go to the top. 1184.55. You traded 1196 and a quarter today, so you go over, back under, less volume. Folks, that's starting to look more like an ABC, bearish ABC. And let's see, it would be from here back up, and you got an ugly close, so that measures to about there, which takes you about into this area, right? If in fact it plays out that way. And the reason I look at it that way is two things. One is you tested that high with less volume, you gave it up, you left a bad looking doji on the charts that looks to try to come back down the other way. Now it is hanging here tonight, 1187, closes at 1188, so it's hanging inside that higher range. So tomorrow will be kind of the key day here for the Russell. Because if you can't hold this higher range and start working back up the other way, right? If you can't hold that range and work back up higher, right, then you're going to have the issue of the ABCD structure on the way down. So the Russell kind of in a key spot here, and you know, we get a lot of key spots on the short-term time frame. On the weeklies, you know, nothing's really big happening yet. All we did was, you know, like last week, if I go back to the S&P 500 on the weekly, and we looked at this last night on the weekly show, and you pop this in, look at it on the weekly, you know, kind of the key area was the 1850, right? This thing traded down and closed underneath that 1850. That was kind of a big event there, because that was saying, okay, you're back in that lower range that was here, right? That was kind of the demarcation area. Well, today you're back over it, and that's why we were just talking about the 1850. You're back in that higher range again. So if you're in the higher range, well, that means you can go higher potentially, right? But the issue is with the other indexes, not with this one. So let's go look at some more. If we look at the Dow Jones, what does the Dow do? Well, the Dow had a nice big spike up today. Okay, what does that tell us? Nothing. I mean, right now the Dow's not telling us anything. It's just a weaker index bouncing around. Transitioned trend to bearish yesterday, flips back around, gets a bounce. I don't know what to make of that. I don't see anything here to tell me anything. If I go to the Nasdaq, now the Nasdaq has been the second strongest, the index being the strongest for the last 2 to 3 months. What does the Nasdaq do? Nasdaq last Friday closed inside the bar, right? Today couldn't even get close to the top of the bar. We saw the Russell get to the top of the bar and fell. This one even got about halfway up and more or less failed. Couldn't really get back up into the higher echelons of these price zones. That doesn't look particularly good. Okay, so you've tested twice again, right? This is starting to set up what looks like a potential ABCD structure to the downside on the Nasdaq. And this is the broad Nasdaq now, that we're not talking about the NDX yet. And that little structure also would take you back into this area, just like on the Russell. Weak bounce. If this thing starts to work lower tomorrow, look out, because you're going to have some sellers in this area. That's the Nasdaq. Now, if we go to the NDX has been the strongest of all the indexes, pushing much higher than everything else. You had a lot of red bars on the way up, right? But it didn't really care. It just kept pushing. Well, then you came off pretty hard. What do you do today? You can't get up there. You can't get anything going. You test into the high on this little, you know, this was the Russian scare bar, 3678. You go over it. You close underneath it. You're back inside. Let me see, 3659. You're just over that bar, so you're almost back inside the lower zone. That lower zone really would pick up, you know, if I put the chart up here and do it this way, you would really pick up some sellers if you close underneath this zone again. And so, just like the others, this one's trying to set up an ABCD structure to the downside. So when I look at 3 of these indexes, they're not critical yet, but they're all starting to show a structure. The Dow really doesn't matter. The S&P actually looked pretty good today. But the other 3, and the other 3 being the leaders, are showing some deterioration and did not really, you know, for a day where the market looked like it was up really good, these charts don't look that way to me on the indexes. Let's look at the sectors and see if the sectors give us any other clues. Starting with the IYT, the transports, I'm going to flip through each of these real quick and see what they look like. So IYT, so it trades back up into the resistance zone, kind of hangs there. Volume tails off. Yeah, that could be an ABCD down as well, but there's nothing that significant here other than the fact that we traded into the bottom of the high. And that's not quite the high because we actually tested it again here, but you traded into the bottom of this bar, which was the breakout bar. Remember, we had failures, retest, regenerate failures as we went down, right? We traded underneath the retest, regen zone, which is this zone. Now we bounce back up into it. Can it carry back to the top? Yeah, it's possible because actually you got a lot of volume at the top, 136.94. No, it actually didn't. So the volume was here. So I don't know. That looks more like an ABCD structure trying to form to the downside as well. Let's see what the semis look like. They had some power today. Yeah, they got a decent bounce. They actually have a high volume high here now. But you can, when you see a high like this high really, it's an ugly high, right? Because you make a new high and you sell off on the same bar. So that's kind of a failure bar. And usually, when I talk about in the books, I talk about a range trade. A range trade comes when you get some sort of a high volume top that a lot of times gets tested the next day. In this case, it didn't, right? Because it closed down towards the bottom. But that, I believe what you're seeing in a lot of these is range trades starting to set up at best. That kind of looks like one as well. Let's go flip through the rest of these. XLB. XLB, not much bounce there, coming right back down. So I don't see anything useful there other than more pain to come. XLE, same sort of scenario. These are all looking like they're trying to set up ABCD structures on the downside. XLF, same thing, right? And in most of these, there was about 4 or 5 of these that broke retest regen zones. Now they're bouncing back up into it, but they're weak bounces. That looks to me like all of these are trying to set up ABCD structures down. XLI should have been some juice today, and it got some decent juice, but there was no volume today, was it? So you come back up into the retest regen zone, you kind of hang in there. Now, if you're looking for the bullish side of things, right, what you want to see is you'll want to see Thursday's bars high taken out, right? If that were to happen, that would kind of change the tune. Some of those highs are the highs, like we just saw in the SMHs. Some of them are lower, just like here. But if you start taking out some of these high volume highs to the upside, right, then that would suggest a different tone than what I'm preaching tonight, which is you're probably setting up range trades as a result of what I see here tonight. XLK, this is technology. Big volume came to this guy today. Well, that one says it can try to go a bit more. Certainly try to test that high again tomorrow. So XLK doesn't look too bad for tomorrow. XLP, safety stock still collecting money. And I suspect XLU traded higher as well. And it did. New highs there, breaks a swing point high, has the volume. That looks to go higher. And if you put it on a weekly, looks to me like it's going back to those weekly highs that are up there. 41.44. So safety still collecting money. And we're not seeing the money elsewhere. How about healthcare? Not particularly good there either. And consumer discretionary, also a weak bounce. These look just like the index. They're telling us the same thing the indexes are, and that is that this bounce was a bounce, and probably not much more than a bounce. Let's look at the OX markets. I know the bonds sold off today. Let's see what kind of volume they had. Less volume as they come back. All right, that low. Remember, bonds are still working in a big range that can kind of be divided into 2 sub-ranges. You've got the top one, and you've got this bottom one down here, right? And that continues to be kind of the demarcation between these two. You get up towards the highs. Now this is 3 lower highs if you're looking at them, if it sticks, right? And the classical guys will look at that and try to draw some lines like that and so forth. And I used to do that, but I don't do that no more, because I think that it tells us a lot more to try to look at supply and demand on the charts. And so when I look at this, what I see is I see potentially a lower high here, but I see us pushing up, with decent volume each time we're coming up, right? You got big volume. What does that do? Well, just like I was talking about a second ago, that usually throws you into a range trade. Well, guess what? We're 6 weeks into a range trade already. That means that we're going to break out the bottom side or the top side at some point. Well, what does the volume tells tell you? Well, so far the volume tells are swelling as we're going up and trailing off as we come down, right? That suggests that this thing's going to want to go this way, which also is in congruence with the trend on this time frame. So if that's true, if bonds want to break out to the north, that should be difficult on stocks. If we pull this back a little bit farther and look at the weekly, it's also trying to break out those swing point highs that are there. There's 2 of them in a row. If it breaks these guys out, right, you're going to get a nice move right back up to here. And that, to me, looks like where bonds want to go. And if that's the case, stocks should have some difficulty while this plays out. So bonds continue to suggest this market's going to try to sell down somehow. Let's look at the gold market. They sold off today. They were up overnight by about, I don't know, the market started down last night in the futures, then ended up about even about the time I went to bed and last looked at them. Then they were up this morning pretty big. Gold, the opposite, started out last night up and then worked its way down. And I'm on the weekly. Let's go to the daily here. And volume comes into it as it comes off the high. That's never a good sign. And it's done it once before, right? If we look at what I just said, if we look at it here, you came off with volume here, but we're not talking about a huge volume differential. I guess we're still not talking about a huge volume differential between the 2 days. But we're certainly getting up into the higher volume bars now in terms of what kind of volume we're seeing. That to me looks like you're going to come back and try to change, the trend here, or at least come back and retest regen on a weekly basis, which it appears. Let me go back to the weekly real quick. That high was 131.44. Yeah, that looks like that's going to try to retest regen off this high. So the low on that high, 126.05, now going back to the daily one more time. 126 gets you back to some decent support in there. But, it'll feel like the world's caving in if it comes back into here. That's a long way down. So I think you're finally seeing some sort of a range starting to set up here. Let me look at the gold stocks real quick. They sold off again today, and volume expands on them as well. So this is starting to look like the volume comes into this, plays out, right? Now volume comes off. You're going to come right back into these bars on the gold stocks. This is going to be the key area. If they can't hold that, then clearly you're going to come back and do your retest regen finally on the daily. So right now you're coming in to do a retest regen here. That will be the first clue as to how deep this is going to get. Looks to me the way this thing's coming back, it's going to get all the way back into this area before it's over with. And this has been a heck of a trade. It's been up 40% almost on gold stocks. I mean, what is that? 21 to 28, $7 on 20. That's 30% easy. Let's see what else we got here. Let me quickly look at the dollar, then I want to pop over to look at the overseas markets. Dollar can't even find itself. I don't know what's going to push the dollar up. It's broken multiple swing point lows on multiple time frames. That's probably going to continue to try to extend. And that's actually interesting if you think about gold. Gold sells off even though the dollar can't push up. And I guess that's a little bit of the quote-unquote fear trade coming off. And maybe the currency trade part of it's still on. Let's go over the world markets, see if there's anything there that looks anything different. I'm guessing it's not, but I haven't looked at them, so let's look at them together. Let's start in the heart of Europe, the big three, because those guys are the ones that were facing the crisis the most with Russia. Okay, so we broke multiple swing points on the way back down, right, on this bar. So, and this is the CACs. So this was the bar. You break two swing point lows, this one and this one, on the way down. All right, so that says you carry for 2 to 3 bars. Well, you carried 2 max, right? You got a pretty good push on the same bar, and then the next one, and now you're bouncing right back up. The key here will be that retest regen, which happens to be almost the same in that that's kind of the Thursday high that I was talking about a while ago. If you can get over that, then things are different. And you can see how it lines up with the retest regen as well. I don't think it's going to get over it, but then again, you know, I've seen these markets refuse to sell down before, so, you know, I try to qualify it saying I don't think so, the way it looks right now. But pretty good bounce here. Not a bad bounce in terms of price, no volume. Let's see what the other ones look like. The DAX has been the weakest one. The CACs has been the strongest one lately. DAX got a nice big push. It also has a retest regen, and it looks like it got over it already. 91.66, and it did. Okay, so that is a failed retest regen on the downside if it holds. So usually the way you want to see this if you're bearish is you want to see this come immediately back in it, because it's just barely peeking over it, right? And there's a little slop in everything, and there's a little slop here as well. So if this doesn't trade back in here tomorrow on the European DAX, right, then that truly is a break, and that would suggest that this thing's not going lower, right? That would not be the case, but instead is setting up some sort of a range, and that range could carry anywhere from here to here. That could be a broad range. So that's the DAX. Let me look at the, so far DAX and the CACs look like they want to try to push a little bit higher. Let's see what the FTSE looks like. And that one doesn't look nearly as good. So the FTSE's caught between a rock and a hard spot. It's trying to come back into that swing point low it broke. 66.08, right? That's the retest regen. It didn't quite get to it. Maybe it will try to get to it tomorrow morning, but it looks to me like that one's going to fail. Let me go over to Asia. So the EEM Asia General was up today. Most of them were up last night. Nikkei wasn't. That still looks to trade and test those lows and probably fail to get lower. Taiwan was testing on a swing point high on the retest regen, and it's bouncing. That's probably what we would have expected to happen, so that looks like it did what it should have done. Let's look at Toronto for my good friends up north. Okay, this one's going to come back finally, and I believe it's going to come back. It's going to at least test that low, and you got two of them lined up together. That could get you a pretty good push back if it happens. So Toronto's going to have to find itself pretty quickly, or it's going to find itself lower is what it's going to do. So Toronto still hanging, but looking a little shaky to me. Australia, one of my friends over in South Pacific. Yeah, so that one, remember this one came back, third time back, breaks the swing point low, breaks the support area finally. After retesting regen, it appears this one is going to come back into the top of this zone that you see that's in green. So that's Yeah, probably. Yeah, you might get a little support here too. 53.19. So that doesn't look too bad. Let's look at the Hong Kong market, because this one was trying to come all the way back to the lows as well, and that one looks like it should bounce tonight. So Hong Kong should get a bounce. Europe's going to be the big question tomorrow. You know, whether it bounces or not. So generally speaking, here it looks to me like these markets are going to continue to try to shake the trees. They're going to work lower. Maybe they get a little bit more bounce. We get the Federal Reserve meeting starting tomorrow. That lasts through Wednesday. Yellen gives her first press conference on Wednesday. I wouldn't be surprised that she comes out and, you know, tries to juice things by saying that, you know, they're not going to raise rates at 6.5. They've been saying that for a while now. You know, before it was like once the unemployment number gets to 6.5, we're going to raise rates. Right, that would be when we would start. Well, they've backtracked on that already. I would think she says that again. And then the issue will be is what does she say about the tapering? Is it going to continue? I expect she'll probably say that. I expect that's what the market expects on both cases. So the Fed event may end up being a non-event unless she surprises somehow in the conference press conference, either upside or downside, in that she surprises with news that we don't expect. That's more easing of some sort, or she flops up somehow in the conference, and people kind of get worried about her leadership, because this is the testing process. Those first. It's a first impression thing, right? Once you set that impression, it's much easier. People don't question you as much, but you don't have the impression yet. So that's going to be a big news conference for her that comes immediately after the announcement. So I think that announcement's going to be kind of a non-event. The press conference itself is going to be the event. All right, I'm out of time here, or just about. I'm going to sign off. Let me see if I got any questions in email or text. And don't see anything there. Don't see anything on the boards. Going to leave it at that then, folks. It's going to be a shaky start this week. You also got options expiration. That usually makes it hard. So look for this market to bounce around more all week long, more than likely. Have a great night. Thanks for joining me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Good night, folks.